Friends, greetings to all of you. The meeting today reminds me of past memories, the good days that I spent in the Indian Super Management Ahmedabad. The years that I spent in Ahmedabad were some of the best years. I came to IIM Ahmedabad in 1968, and the 1982-83 batch was the last one that I taught. And some of you taught here. In 1982, I left IIM Ahmedabad to go to the Reserve Bank as Deputy Governor. In some sense, it was an unusual appointment. This, in the history of the Reserve Bank of India, this was the first time a person from the academia was directly appointed as Deputy Governor. Earlier on, the Deputy Governors came from within the Reserve Bank or from the government. But there was one exception. Dr. R.K. Azhari was appointed as Deputy Governor in the year in which the commercial banks were nationalized, 1969. R.K. Azhari was at that time editor of the Economic and Political Weekly. Therefore, his appointment had a political overtones also to it. But then there have been others since then who have been appointed, who also come to the academia, not necessarily for the academia directly, but coming on to the government and from the government to the Reserve Bank. Many people used to ask me at that time, how difficult was the transition to be a deputy governor from the academy. I told them that the transition was not that difficult. The problems with which Reserve Bank of India was wrestling were also the problems which I had studied earlier. Therefore, in some sense, the shift per se is not that difficult. But then one realized that there is a big distinction between being an academic and being part of an institution which has executive role. There are two important differences. One was essentially that the academics wrote and worked at their own pace. Except, of course, when there are research projects with a deadline. But largely speaking, the academics work at their own pace. And they can produce, and they have produced, at the end of it all, very interesting books and very interesting ideas. But in the executive arm of the government, this is not possible. When a problem comes, you have to apply your domain knowledge and your skills and find a solution. If you miss that opportunity, then perhaps you're lost. So that is a big difference between the academia and the Reserve Bank. The second difference is also important in the sense the responsibility for final decision rests on them. I can tell you one example and then go on to talk about the subject of the debate. When I first went to the Reserve Bank, the executive director sent me something with which I did not agree. I looked at it and I thought that this is something wrong. So I called the deputy executive director and was trying to explain to him why what he has suggested is wrong. We should look at things differently. Then he was sitting before me, and after he had talked to him for some time to explain the situation and all that, he didn't say anything. He just looked up to me and then said, "You have the prerogative to overrule me." So that was the end of the story. In the sense that what was really required is, as I say, the buck stops here. So you have to take the responsibility. So these are some of the differences, but fundamentally there is no difficulty in academic moving to important positions in government or in the Reserve Bank. Of course, the 15 years that I spent in the Reserve Bank, first 10 years as deputy governor and last 5 years as the governor of the Reserve Bank, whereas the Chinese say interesting times. When you say interesting times, it means difficult times. So what really happened was that there were differences between the government and the Reserve Bank, and we fought. And the issue finally is that we must find ways and means through which, when there are opposite views, how they are resolved. I mean, if they are resolved in a very combative fashion, then there are problems that arise as a consequence. So when I was, of course, the Reserve Bank governor, somebody asked, are there not differences with the government? The only answer I could give at that time was that that was a difficult time. So many decisions needed to be taken. Gold was to shift, this and that, and so on. So many things have been done. And I only told him that we could not offer the luxury of a fight between the governor and the government. So that is exactly the situation. I mean, I think. But then I will not go into it. I have written the book. Some of you have seen it. And we can talk about it at some other time. But let me take a little bit of a time to talk about an issue that keeps coming up often and often, namely that India should become a developed country. My knowledge of Hindi was very limited. Therefore, when I first heard Viksit Bharat, I didn't understand what it was. It was only later on I understood it is developed and Bharat. So the whole point is that there are, as an aspirational goal, it is good. I mean, I think that is by the end, by the time that India completes 100 years of independence, that is 2047, India should become a developed country. There's no, when you look at that issue, there are certain clarifications that we need to address. There are countries in the world, like South Korea, which became a developed country in a very short period of time. In some sense, we have reached a position right now of being relatively strong. I mean, we are talk about India being the fifth largest economy or the fourth largest, and some people predict in only 2 years we may become the second or the third largest economy. But the point of problem is the problem is that in terms of per capita income, when you look at it, we are in the bottom 1/3 of the regions. In fact, if we had addressed the population problem more intensively in the 50s and 60s, probably our situation would have been very different. But anyway, when we talk about developed countries, there are certain things that need to be clarified. What is the definition of a developed country? And you will see in the definition of a developed country, several questions will arise. What will be the population growth? What will be the exchange rate of India in 2047? How will inflation move in the next 25 years? All of these have to be resolved before we can really say this is the required rate of growth for India to become a developed country by 2047. So first, there is no definition of a developed country. The World Bank classifies countries into various categories like poor, middle income countries, and high income countries. The middle income countries are again subdivided. So when we say that India wants to become a developed country, we take the definition that World Bank gives for being a high income country. As of a recent period, that is, I think it's 2024-25, a country which has a per capita income of $14,000, I am rounding $14,000, is classified as a high income country. We can take that as a possible definition for a developed country also. But then please remember that the definition of a developed high income country in 1997-98 was something like 9,640. So that also changes. Therefore, one important question that arises is that what will be the cutoff point, so to say, when we reach 2047. So, if you look at 9,464 and 14,000, you can fit a line or something like that and project. On that basis, we get something like $18,000 per capita in 2047 in order to be designated as a developed country. Now, even on that number, there are questions, but it's one way of made on some assumptions work. In fact, some people have taken $20,000 per capita. Obviously, the higher the per capita income we achieved in 2047, the more difficult it is going to be to reach that goal. Now, what do we have to do? Then we have to calculate what should be the total aggregate income of India in 2047. For that, you need to find out what will be the population growth. So in 2047, what will be the population growth? And if you multiply it by, that is 162 crores, will be in 2047. Here, the demographers have extended the population level only up to a point. Beyond that, we have to project also. Therefore, that is how we got 162 crores. Multiply that $18,000 by the 160, which will give you the per capita income at that time. Not something, that will give you the aggregate income at that time. That comes to be about $30 trillion. We have the aggregate income to be $30 trillion. Now, in order to estimate the required rate of growth of the economy, we need to translate the $30 trillion into rupees. Because our aggregate income is calculated on the basis of what is the aggregate income now in rupees and what will be the aggregate income in 2047. So the aggregate income of 30 trillion has to be converted into rupees. Here comes the exchange rate. So the exchange rate of the dollar to the rupee, we will have to estimate. And as you know that the rate has been fluctuating, but almost it looks like, because we always express the exchange rate not As 1 rupee equal to something, we always say $1 is equal to something. So this way, we have to project what the value of the dollar will be in 2047. You can, I was saying that when I was a student in the United States, let's go back many years ago, and you may remember the value of the dollar when I went was 4.75 rupees. The dollar was equal to 4.75 rupees, and the dollar now is equal to somewhere around 88 rupees. So you multiply that to get the what the value of the aggregate output should be in 2047. Now, those numbers are given. There is more than one article I have written. It is there, and then we arrive at the total. What is the required rate of growth? So we have today 300 trillion rupees. It has to become something like 4,000 trillion rupees in 2047. And that gives you a nominal rate of growth of 11.41%. That is, the nominal income in India has to grow at 11.4% from now on to 2047 to become a development. Okay. The nominal income means what? Output plus the price level. So if you assume the price level to be 4%, which is the goal of the new monetary framework, you get a rate of growth of 7.4% required to do it. So how does this 7.1% look like? In fact, it is, if you look at it from 2012-13 to the most recent period, 23-24, it is 6.1%. Now, there are years in which we have grown better off. In fact, in the mid-2000s, for 3 years continuously, we grew at a rate higher than 9% per annum. That is according to the old calculation. Under the new calculation, this 9% has come down. But the point is that it has been possible to grow. But then, very difficult question is, you have to grow continuously year after year at 7.41%. That is about 20 years we have to grow continuously. And there's also another issue there. Okay, 7.41% growth rate is for the period as a whole as an average. It is going to be very difficult to grow at 7.4% per annum when the base is expanded very much. Therefore, in the early period, we will have to grow at a rate higher than 7.4%, and perhaps slow down towards it. That's one thing. The second is the kind of situation that we see right now in the world, and the difficulties that we might face if the developed countries adopt the attitude that the United States is now taking. Now, whether the view that the US has taken is temporary, or whether there is going to be a change of philosophy almost regarding world growth and world trade. So there are going to be a lot of difficulties and a lot of problems as we look at it. But to summarize largely the issue, that on the assumptions that I have made, what is required is a rate of growth in real terms at 7.41%. Yes, I myself estimated it lower earlier because there is some question about whether to take $14,000 per capita or $18,000 per capita, which I have mentioned. I think the right way to look at it is to look at $18,000 per capita. So the point really is that we really have a difficult exercise before us to do. Many people have calculated what is needed to achieve the developed country status. But we have, in an article, looked at the regional dimensions of what this is. Today, as you know, that 6 states account for 52% of India's national income. I think these states are Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, UP, Gujarat, and West Bengal. The balance from 26 states and union territories account for the 48. Therefore, there is going to be a big problem because when we say on an average the country should grow at 7.4%. Next question to ask is at what rate these 6 states will grow and at what rate the other states will grow. The calculations show that all these 6 states that I mentioned need to grow at a rate which is even nominal growth rate, which is 11.4%, is much less. Tamil Nadu need to grow at 8.7%, Gujarat at 9.6%, Karnataka at 8.7%, and so on. On the other hand, Bihar needs to grow at 17.4% in order to reach the developed country stage. Equally, UP has to grow at 14.56%. What this shows is there is not going to be a convergence, as they call it, even in 2047. I mean, these other countries, other states will need to have grown at a much faster rate than what we need. But we have done some calculations regarding the growth rate of these states also and found out that by 2057-58, except for Jharkhand, all other states will reach the developed country status. But 2057-58, you see how far it is. It's almost under 3 decades more in order to reach it. So this, to some extent, is what I may call the arithmetic of fixed employment. This gives you only a broad, the long road that we have to travel, or the road that we have to travel, which is going to be tougher and is going to be more difficult. And as I also indicated, that some of the states will be able to do it much quicker, and some will take a longer time. Then the question that arises is, what should be the appropriate strategy of delivery? If this is the goal, and this is the rate of growth which we have to achieve in order to reach that goal, then the whole question arises, what is going to be the strategy of delivery? Now this is of course a much larger issue. What is the strategy of delivery? And different people look at different aspects of the economy and argue for push this, push that. I think that's a good approach. But basically, I wrote in a paper 5 things to urge, and I wrote in that first. In order to achieve a higher rate of growth, you need to raise the rate of investment up by 2 percentage points. Our investment right now, both public and private, all taken together, is really about something 33% or 34%, somewhere in that range it reminds. Students, I think I will have to ask you to remember the old equation that we talked about, which is the Herard-Gamard equation. It said that the growth rate is equal to what? Investment divided by incremental capital output ratio. ICO, as they call it. Incremental capital output ratio is the amount of capital required to produce 1 unit of output. Therefore, if the investment rate is, let us say, 20%, and if the ICO is 4, then the economy can grow at 5%. You may recall this statement. Now, the incremental capital output ratio now happens to be about 5.1 over a long period. But there are problems in measuring it. I will leave it there. But then what we are essentially saying is that if the 7%, let us say, is what is required, the 5 is the thing that will really require 35% of the GDP as investments. So, roughly speaking, what we really need to do is to raise the investment rate of the economy by 2 percentage points. In some ways, in the recent period, one thing has been happening. The government has been very keen, and if you look at the composition of the industry, now the government is doing more than what it was doing, let's say, about 3 years ago. So that is what we call capital expenditures. If you look at the budget, you will see the capital expenditures on rise. But then in the last year, or in the current year, I should say, the growth in investment, capital expenditure of the government has fallen because it cannot be kept going like that. I think there are other difficulties. Therefore, what is critically important is really that the private investment, particularly the corporate investment, needs to rise so that we can get an investment rate which is about 36-37%. And that perhaps will give us the rate of growth of 7%. So the first thing I would say is really make raise the investment rate by 1%. Oh, I'm sorry, not 2%, in order to achieve the rate of growth that we have in mind. We must also absorb technologies to remain competitive. Now, this is going to be a tough issue because technological changes that are happening right now may have other effect on employment, may have other effects on the economy. But at the same time, if you do not absorb the new technologies, you will also become non-competitive. Therefore, this is a critical area, and we really cannot get away from absorbing the new technologies. Then comes the other critical issue, or the third thing that we will say, is that we must focus on relatively labor-intensive investment, so that the employment aspect can be somewhat relieved. So we need to combine the two, so to say, absorb the technologies to remain competitive, and emphasize on relatively labor-intensive industries, and so that the employment opportunities can expand. I am very pointedly using the word relative labor intensive. The word I'm using it because there is no product now to say that it is simply labor intensive. No, I think this is even including some of the industries like leather industries that we talk about. No, it is not, because everywhere the new technologies will enter, and therefore we should be able to look at labor-intensive industries by looking at per unit, per rupee of investment, how much labor can be employed. There can be a definition that can be given, and then look at it and find out ways and means in which these industries can be invested. And finally, we need to invest a lot more. Maybe this is public investment in terms of health and education and other factors, other areas, in order to ensure social justice. So all of this are important. Therefore, the strategy of development should include all the 4 elements that I talked about. Namely, raising the investment rate, absorbing technologies, focusing on relatively labor investments, and, and emphasis on health and education and similar other activities in order to expand social justice. The, as I said, we can talk a lot more about each one of the elements that I talked about. But the point essentially is that the strategy of development that you must fulfill is what I would call multi-dimensional. You cannot say that we will focus on this or that. I think it is not possible to. It may be possible to do it, but that is not the correct solution. That is a multi-dimensional approach to the strategy of development. I will conclude only by saying that each one of these elements of strategy need further analysis and critical understanding. But if you really focus on this, on these 5 elements that I talked about, it is still possible to achieve rate of growth at 7%. There is also one other question, and some people mentioned about the committee which mentioned about poverty line in India and all that. The growth and equity must go together. You cannot have sustained growth without equity. On the other hand, equity will be a distant dream if you do not do it. Therefore, the essential critical point is that we must get both growth and equity go together. At this stage of development in India and elsewhere in the world, we cannot sequence it. Growth first and equity later. This was possible at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. If you look at what happened in UK and what happened in other countries during the mid-18th century and later on, the period of Industrial Revolution, the industry grew very rapidly, but the people suffered as well. Those of you, I know you must have read Charles Dickens' various novels, will know what a kind of deprivation that people had during the early years of the Industrial Revolution. But today, as I said, we can't sequence, and they must go together. And that is where social justice comes. That is where opportunities for the people who are deprived of growth. And for that, as I said, greater investment in health, education, and also in some other forms of social justice must be required. As people say, or as we say, that growth and equity are the 2 legs with which a nation must walk. If we ignore any one leg, we can only leap along, and therefore that is not advisable. And growth and equity should not be posed as opposing considerations. They must be woven together to produce an acceptable pattern of development. Therein lies economic wisdom or economic statesmanship. I will conclude only by saying Viksit Bharat, or the status of a developed country, is not simply a statistical artifact. It must be a transformative journey in which government, people, and the society at large must come together. Thank you very much.
Invited meeting has happened finally after 2 postponements. It's been very, very well worth it, as Professor has a very lucid consummate and erudite fashion, laid out before us the risks involved in what we are talking about. First of all, the definition. Many people just talk about out of the air and whatever comes to their mind, but he has very clearly, arithmetically laid out what is required, which is very, very important so that the mind is very focused. He has also laid out the risks and the problems in achieving that rate of growth, which is about 1.2, 1.3% more than what we are achieving now. That is very well captured in arithmetic. More than that, the averages are people below and people above, and how some states will have to achieve super normal growth rates which no other states has perhaps seen since independence, or perhaps any other maybe country. Only Botswana, I think, has achieved the kind of rate of growth he was mentioning over a period of time. But that's very small world. So he has very well laid out, as well as the multi-dimensional four-quarter strategy also is very well laid out. And of course, he has warned us that equity and growth are not two different things. They have to be fused together, and we have to weave them together to move forward. Otherwise, there will be serious consequences. Thank you so much, sir, for that very erudite and very consummate, lecture on what to do, how to do it, what are the risks involved, how to, do it, and recollecting experiences with Professor Rangarajan. So what we'll do is about 30 minutes is what I think we have. Maybe we'll have about 3-4 questions and 3-4 experience sharing. We'll give more preference to experience sharing rather than questions. And my request is whosoever wants to speak to 2 minutes maximum. Okay? Because more the number of people who can speak, the better it is, and we'll get a much wider perspective of things. And as a small punishment, if anybody exceeds 2 minutes, he may have to buy a round of beer to all of us. Thank you. And one thing we should avoid perhaps is any personal questions or requiring the professor to go into political area, although you should read the chapter on the days of the Raj in that book. Superbly laid out, only small chapter, how to handle the government in a very political manner, very well. Nowadays you see so much of quarrels over the governor holding up some bills and governor versus administration. But he has laid out very, very succinctly, very simply, as per the constitution, what's your responsibility, how to act in a way with tact that you avoid all this. It is a chapter, very small, worth reading it. I have read it 2 or 3 times myself. Thank you so much, and I'll do one thing. Whosoever wants to ask a question or share their experience, you may raise your hand or you put it in the group if you want. We will pass the mic, or if you prefer to come here, you are more comfortable.
Of social justice that you mentioned. In terms of today, the way the world is moving in general, it seems to be a very unequal world. So, is there a point in your analysis where you see this change, or are we shifting towards more inequality as we go further, despite the growth?
No, the issue of inequality is it's a critical issue. I put it in under the broad heading of social justice. Now, if there is to be social justice, I mentioned that one of the elements in the strategy of development implies what? When we look at the problem of how to lift people out of poverty, there can be 2 approaches. One is essentially to say that we will reduce inequality and we will That will be the goal. There is an alternative approach, and that is whether to reduce poverty. Now, the two are not the same. Reducing inequality is a much larger issue. But I have been arguing the first issue that we must handle is to reduce poverty. All the data now reveal that various actions taken, food security, payments for minimum payments to women, and so on, all of that has essentially resulted in the what some people call it absolute poverty has been reduced in India. According to the committee which I chaired, in 2011-12, I think the number of people below the poverty line was something like 39%. According to the latest data that are available for the consumption expenditure survey of 2023-24, it has come to single digit. It is about 4%. There are problems with consumption expenditure survey data. There are issues that have been raised. These have been addressed in my committee report also. But the fact of the matter is that the absolute poverty that we talked about is not there in some variations among states may be there, but the aggregate number is comforting. The states are because concerned. The poverty line that our committee defined is also not an undisputable number. There are people who criticize it, saying that with that now amount that we have specified, whether anybody can be comfortable or not comfortable with it, whether they can even live reasonably. So this is an issue that is there. But on the World Bank, for example, has also measures the poverty by the $1.15, $1.15 or something like that, as a day's consumption, the resource consumption. But that data also reveals that the poverty, absolute poverty, has come down. So the next step may be that we should raise the level of absolute poverty and see how many people are below poverty. But I can tell you, we have made calculations in the latest, based on the latest survey, that whatever be the line you take, if you compare it with 11, 12, or even a real data, on the current level, that is a substantial level. Absolute level may be higher, but the reduction is very much lower. So I would say that really what we need to do is to address the issue in various ways. First, address the issue in terms of reducing the number of people who are described as poor. And then we can go and include other things. The point is that when the rate of growth of the economy keeps increasing steadily at a level, then the issue of inequality, the issue of poverty, and all that comes to there is enough data to show that as the income rate goes up, and I believe if we really succeed in growing at, let's say, if not 7, I reasonably argued, and at the moment it looks like 6.5% is possible. If the economy goes on at 6.5%, continuously year after year, then this problem will come down. But it is also important to address the specific issues that have arisen. Because why are all the governments now, state governments, anxious and keen to some program in which they want to give a certain minimum amount to women and children, women not also children. And that is because that the, the, the acuteness of poverty must be reduced, and therefore this can be done. And the food security program is a good program. I think I also chaired a committee on that. National, the food security program that today, to give rice or wheat per kilo, 3 rupees or 2 rupees, it's a big thing. Because in the market, the rate is so high as compared to that. So, in the budget, as you know, the food subsidy is 2 lakh crore. Not a small number, 2 lakh crore is the food subsidy that is given. I'm not saying, I think I should not be mistaken, but I think it's important to point out that everything is hunky-dory or whatever the say that is, oh, it's all perfect. No, I'm not saying that. But the point is that we are addressing the issue. And the best way to do it is to keep the rate of growth at a high level and do it continuous. I think this, and address at the same time the issues relating to health, education, etc. In fact, the whole question is when people say give money, is that the best way to do it? When we say health and education, if the system can be so toned down that anybody who falls sick can go to a private health center and get the benefit. That is sometimes even better than providing just the cash. So, education. I mean, I think some states like Tamil Nadu has done extremely well. I mean, the quality of education is one question, but the other is the quantity of education. I mean, the enrollment rate is very good in states like Tamil Nadu. Therefore, while addressing the issue of growth, we should also address the problems that are faced by certain sections of society.
When we are, is there a parameter when we call as purchase power parity, and can we define development and our status on the basis of that? How is it different from the way in which we are just calculating on the basis of dollars and equal, everyone is equal, and so obviously I suppose it happens because of some baskets of what we are using, and given our population and diversity is different from some other countries, some other places. But does that change our figures? Does that change our strategy and approach?
What is it that you want to do?
Sir, if I can paraphrase, the current purchasing power parity is about 4, let's say. What happens if it gets down to, let's say, 2 or something, in which case is 18,000, we should assume that we are already at 6,000 if it is coming to 2. So then the growth rate required has to be recalculated as 6 to 18 instead of 8 to 18.
What I'm saying is that's our definition of what we call as developed. Itself changes simply because of the way in which we say the purchase power parity is such between these various countries.
You were talking about the implication of using market exchange rate
versus actual, what's happening for our basket of usage.
Yeah. See, these are subtle changes one can make, but the point essentially is that the nominal, if you are talking in terms of nominal growth and the output increase in nominal terms, then you have to use a market exchange. If you're really asking about what needs to be done, because you used to have you have to have a common denominator, common measurement, because the word developed country is not just only to India. The word developed country applies to a whole lot of countries which have to be judged. So then we have to use uh, market exchange rate, which is available. And we have to do it. But certainly, if you want to look at the rate of growth differently, for India alone, if you want to look at, not compare it with other countries, because inter-country comparison becomes very difficult. So you can look at India and see where it is to go. Then many calculations will have to be redone now. It cannot be done on this basis. So then you will have to first tell me what is a developed country. And if you want to look at developed country as a country with a certain per capita income, now you can give it in purchasing power parity terms also. Then everything will have to, then you will have to calculate your total output also in purchasing power parity. And then see what the rate of growth is.
The example you gave on the poverty situation, in 2012 and what it is now, itself, in my opinion, is happening because of this purchasing power parity and not so much because of our own development.
Calculating the poverty is a different thing. Purchasing power parity comes when you compare two countries. When you compare two countries, you can say, for example, if a dollar is equal to 88 rupees, the person then asks, what will you purchase with 88 rupees? And what will you purchase with $1? Then you compare it and then say, it is not market exchange rate which is relevant, it is really what the basket will be. What is the equivalent basket will be? Dollar gives a particular basket of goods and services. Whether that basket of goods and services, at what level of the rupee terms, what do you say? So that is the purchasing power parity. So purchasing power parity comes when you compare two countries. When you compare India, yes, that is why we have the price index. Our price index is what? Because when you measure it in real terms, what it means is that you adjust for prices. And when you adjust for prices, automatically you are comparing the basket of goods and services at one point in time. At a basket of goods and services another.
73, and I had, of course, the benefit of being taught by Rangarajan. And I recollect this is experience sharing. I asked him in the first one, why are we using such a thick book? We used to have from Samuelson's book. Yeah. We used to be, the textbook was Samuelson. It used to be quite a thick book. I asked him, why are we having such a thick book for a 3-month course? And he said, you are all learning what is taught in other undergraduate schools. What is taught in 3 years, you are taught in 3 months. And that's why this book is so thick. And of course, it was a credit that he could teach us. And I would say it is also a credit that we could learn. Because I have been abroad for most of the about 30 years, and I found in several countries I could comprehend the situation by the economics which I learned, which most other managers of the local people were not aware of. Like in Arab countries, they didn't have much a comprehension of what is economics. But having gone through something, it was really helpful to comprehend the difference between, country to country, or, or even when going to the United States, why that country is different. So it was a very useful subject which was taught and which I am happy to learn. Thank you.
Thank you. Who gets your after that?
Not a question, it is your observation.
Yeah, Ravi, PGP 17A. During our time, we used to offer a second elective course which is called EABP, Economic Analysis for Business Planning. It is a course highly recommended by our seniors, and used to get oversubscribed. His lectures used to be very lively, and then interspersed with lot of subtle humor. And I just want to relate to one such incident anecdote which he read in the class. And I think it was when he was teaching financial instruments. So the incident is, he says, well-dressed Englishman walks into the Bank of England and presents the teller with a bunch of documents. The teller reviews it, looks up to the customer and says, "Sir, are you here for conversion or redemption?" The customer is puzzled. He says, "Sir, am I in the Bank of England or the Church of England?" So that's the kind of humor you used to have in the class. And I'm very happy to see you in your trademark safari suit and always spot him in his dark safari suit. And it's good to see him there, and it felt like sitting in your classroom. And may Narayana bless you with good health.
Sir, India's judicial system is known for notorious for delays. I wanted to know if there is any research on what is the impact of judicial reforms or the lack of it on the economic growth or on its acceleration or deceleration.
I think a lot of people who talk about it, how do we speed up the process of justice dispensation and all that, there's a lot more that the government and the others can do. But certainly, in a broad sense, ensuring an appropriate judicial system is critically important for economic growth. After all, economic growth depends upon fulfillment of contractual obligations and so on. And fulfillment of contractual obligations depends upon how the judicial system functions. Therefore, the quick dispensation of justice, and I suppose it is also part of the element of social justice. In the sense that when people need a good system of dispensation of justice, that must be given. But one cannot really talk about it in detail except, let us say, for example, we have the Competition Commission now. The Competition Commission is part of the judicial system. That essentially flows from the basic argument that competition among producers, sellers, is critically important in order to ensure that the prices might be Why do we all favor competition? There is a textbook answer there that perfect competition leads to a situation in which that no single seller will be able to influence prices. Therefore, all those things are there. Therefore, in judicial, there are courses taught now in some universities in the United States, but it is also picking up in India, what is called law and economics. The whole subject of law and economics is the interrelationship between the legal provisions that we have and the economy. So in some sense, the question is relevant because people do study the interdependence between how the good judicial system will help the economic system. But there are aspects of the judicial system which do not go directly or which do not directly affect economic activity. The judicial system has a much wider ambit. It deals with thou shalt not steal, and thou shalt not kill, and all that are there. And that is an aspect of the judicial system which is not directly related to economic activities. But there are many other aspects of economic activities which are closely with the judicial system. And in fact, the the judgments and the awards given by the Competition Commission and other related bodies directly feeds into how the economics function.
So the question resonates very much with me in the sense that whatever great initiatives RBI has been taking on bad assets has all been neutralized by the judicial, delays. So you talk of SICA and BAFR, SFRC, and BRT. Now even IPBI seems to be going the same way. Only the judiciary has understood the larger purpose and played along. Maybe it would have been different. Now,
Vijay Raghavan, PGP 80. Sir, my question is, with increasing states, but these high growth states also have a population degrowth. So similar things could it happen to Bihar, Uttar Pradesh and all. So the later part of this Viksit Bharat thing, will population come down?
The link between population growth and economic status is very well known. But if you look at the way the population growth has been happening, the net fertility rate, for example, for India as a whole is now 2.1, which is very close to the level at which population will stabilize. And you will be surprised to know that not only the richer states, but also the states in which education system is developed, but also others have also reduced the I what one example, Telangana, the fertility rate has come down. It is in the range of 2.1. And what was needed was really a commitment on the part of the government. If the government is committed and pushed it, it happens. It is not just only the educated states. Look at two states, Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. Uttar Pradesh and Bihar had a fertility rate of 3 about 2 decades ago or even like 15 years ago. But UP's fertility rate has come down to close to 2.1. Bihar's fertility rate still remains at. Therefore, it is true. Greater awareness, women's education, all of this play a role. But I find studying the population trend in India, I've done some work in this area. I find that the commitment of the government plays a big part. So, like what has Tamil Nadu done, Kaveri River, Kauperi River, and all that kind of the commitment with which they pursue that. As I mentioned today in my lecture, I feel that if in the 50s and 60s we have done a lot more on population control, we will not be facing the kind of problem. Because today, many African countries have a per capita income which is higher than India. That's because it is not the numerator that is a problem. It is the denominator that is a problem. Because your total income is less, and you divide it by the population. And when you divide it by a very large population, it's going to be very tough. Therefore, I'm saying that yes, education, awareness, more remote situation. But the whole point is that if you look at why the fertility rate has gone down, in all of these states, it is because of what we call what the demographers call as the ultimate tool. It means what it means is women are, so to say, undergo the surgery, and that is way the population recover. In fact, the vasectomy on the part of the men has been very low. I think this is not related So while women's education helps and all that, there is a need for a change in the attitude of the people also. But I say that yes, education helps and all that, but I find a lot more commitment on the part of the government.
Just to add one bullet kind of fact in this is Iran, which had a fertility rate of nearly 6 per woman by around 1980, brought it down by 2005 to 1.8. You can't relate it to anything else. It's a country which is, Islamic. Its growth rate of income was not this much. Women are not educated, so to say. It defies everything, but it has achieved what I should, positively say, cataclysmic changes in population growth due to that. Sir, you are first of time? Yes.
Professor, I have a small question. You had given a list of remedies like increasing the investments or embracing technology. So in that way, I wanted to know what is Professor Sia's view on the startup ecosystem. How important is the startup ecosystem? The role of startup ecosystem in getting developed India.
I think the startup ecosystem, as you call it, is, has been a change in attitude on the part of engineering students and technology students in the various institutions. IITs have now started up their own parks and so on, which essentially pushes people from being just going and working for somebody else, but start their own. But which means we need to build up the associated institutions, like the banking system. This plays an important part in terms of providing credit, and whether mindset has changed in terms of what they can do for us as startups. So it has succeeded in some areas, it has not succeeded in some other areas. So the question is really which kinds of activities work better for youth startups. And I mean, the choice of what to produce and how to produce becomes extremely but the change in the mindset of the students is becoming perceptible now. They are doing not necessarily go and accept a job and so on. But the other thing on, for example, way back in the 50s and 60s, we started with the idea of industrial parks and so on. The idea is that the government will make available the infrastructure in terms of availability of water, power, and so on. And those who want to set up an industry will get those benefits. So that worked well. And that also does not work well in all states. So one has to identify that if the startups are to succeed, what kind of infrastructure to be made available by the government in terms of not only credit facilities, but also availability of power and so on. And then let the startups function more effectively.
Thank you. And 5 hands have already gone up. We will go as per the sequence and finish it. Please. Sir.
Proud to be here to listen to. I am very proud to be here and listen to one of our very distinguished professors of the IIM Ahmedabad, where I had the opportunity of being a student for 2 years. And it is his lectures only that have put in lot of interest for me in the subject of economics. And after that, of course, we were talking about inflation is one thing, really something which is troubling everybody because the interview first I attended, I got the job on inflation because the person who was interviewing me asked me, and suppose there is a money problem and the Reserve Bank reduces Reserve Bank puts in a lot of money, what will happen? Then I told immediately inflation will come. If they are gone printing the notes, then inflation will come. So he was immediately impressed and then he gave me the job as a probation officer with the State Bank of India. So that's how I was not a student of economics, I had only minor economics, but still that economics got me from that time on. And then after I went to that IIM, I had an excellent exposure to the areas of economics and the development, especially Indian economic development and growth rate and incremental capital ratio, investment rate and savings rate. But there, I think I also want to know what is the current savings rate because savings rate is down. You want to say investment rate of like 8%. So all these things got me and also related to the economic service examination, given by the support of this professor. And I only want to mention now because I have not speak about his greatness. It's only an opportunity for him to talk about his presidency. What I am interested is to tell all the audience if there is accessibility is really high. The other day I just rang up his number and asked him that I want to have an interview with him. And because I was worried about the fact that there is a lot of report on global results in economics throughout the world in the last 55 years. He was an engineer. He was an engineer at the US University. He got a book on Nobel Prize in Economics, and we found that there is only 1% of India. So that was sort of a big for me that I found why we are not having more Nobel laureates in economics because he was an economics professor. I took the liberty of writing to him. But this is the situation I find, and I find a lot of people are coming from developed countries, US, UK, and things like that. And India is, of course, these people also have social power and come back and then they participate in which have Nobel ways. So I asked them, when we have so much of talent, so much of intellect, so much of thing, why we are not able to produce as part of the recent Bharat, that we will keep a goal of producing some Nobel laureates in economics because we have a distinguished economics school in Chennai. I think he is a student professor, so I took the liberty of writing to him, and he immediately responded to me and told me that these are the problems and all this. So I was really glad that I could approach him at any time and then talk about my problems to him. So I'm really happy, sir, that you took me back. And I was really thrilled to get a reply from you. And I want to submit you this great honor for you, Professor. And I thank the Professor that it is good that he has a Professor. Thank you very much.
Sir, and this for me, PGP, 78 PGP. And many of us are proud students of you, and we are very thankful to you for you, sir. My question is, sir, based on a thought from your lecture, the motivation for all planners and decision makers is equity with growth, which is growth with social justice. Now, recently, I read a McKinsey report that 74% of jobs in many sectors are going to be displaced. And the remaining person may have to revise skills, they have to learn new skills to be competitive. So when we have this equity and social justice, seem to be a contradiction in terms, because if you have technology, the growth will be dictated by technology. But social justice in a country like us, with the 130 crores, we need to have jobs. And millions of people are coming out of colleges, engineering colleges, business schools, and so on. So how this problem going to be looked at by decision makers in the years to come?
Technology improves the competitiveness, and if you don't absorb those technologies, then obviously then we will remain uncompetitive and we will not be able to produce goods at, at a competitive rate. But at the same time, one needs also disturbed by the fact that these new technologies can result in the absorption of people. So my answer to that is something that I share. That is what I was talking about relatively labor intensive. Identify those areas and then uh, take care of the employment through those development or through the growth of those industries and remain competitive by absorbing the technology. It's not going to be an easy job. I mean, I'm not, I mean, it is easier to make the statements, but the problem is going to be tough. But I really do think, for example, I have in one article mentioned about what are the sunrise industries. And in that I indicated that food processing industry is a sunrise industry in India. Because it helps on the one hand agriculture. It helps on the other hand the employment of more labor because what food processing will come under the relatively more labor intensive. And perhaps whatever technology that is available will have to be used because the whole question of packaging, processed of food, and other issues that might come up. Therefore, in identifying sunrise industries, we need to take into account the dual problems that we have and achieve it. But the point is that we cannot ignore any one of them. My main point is that if you say that technologies are taking away employment, can we give up these technologies? I think that would be a wrong thinking. So we need to bear these two in mind and probably produce a system, ecosystem which is balancing these two.